paranoid, you know.
Tony Iommi, you know, yeah, it kind of laid the groundwork for every metal musician after Sabbath, you know. And then, like, you know, there's Zeppelin, there's AC/DC, and there's Van Halen, there's all that stuff. But yeah, there's something about Black Sabbath that really laid the groundwork, you know, the blueprints for what we play today. Well, we'll just do Into the Void. This is the first one when I smoked weed for the first time. And I was with this friend of mine, and I just remember hearing, you know. That was like the first like real entrance to like heavy metal that I wanted. That changed my life, that riff. And the whole point is I wasn't trying to imitate Tony Iommi. I'm just trying to like evolve Tony Iommi's playing from back then to my own standards or to my own personal, you know, soul and my own music, you know. It's like I learned from him. That's the school of Iommi.
This one little tricky technique that I finally saw somebody play right in front of me and made me make it sound like the way Tony Iommi was playing it, this little sort of hammer-on thing. So it was Black Sabbath, Paranoid.
Geezer Butler was another one. Yep. Which he's got this kind of real greasy thing about how Geezer plays, you know. We've done some shows with Sabbath over the years, both the Ronnie Dio version in the early 90s and then with Ozzy. In 2014, we did a run to South America together. And it was fun to watch Geezer. You know, years ago, I used to play Paranoid in one of my little cover bands I had back in Minnesota. And then, of course, Megadeth, we covered Paranoid. And as we were trying to figure out which song to play for that Nativity of Black record, I initially suggested, hey, let's do Paranoid, just because I knew it, and it was, you know, a pretty simple song as far as the arrangement. It's a little avant-garde, the arrangement, actually, for such a simple song. But we went around basically the entire catalog, and we tried all these different Sabbath songs, and eventually ended up back on Paranoid. And, of course, I played with a pick, so... I'm sort of emulating Geezer's sound. It's the Megadeth version, the David Ellison version of a Geezer line.
Or it could have been Paranoid by the Dickies, not Black Sabbath.
I was listening to all kinds of stuff. For me, it was really easy to pick up on Black Sabbath because, of course, I loved it because it was so heavy, but so easy to play to as well. Like, you didn't have to have amazing technique to be able to play something like Iron Man, you know. Like when you're a kid, this is like the coolest thing ever.
Yeah.
And even now, it's the coolest thing ever. So, you know, or even like Paranoid, you know. Like just.
Yeah.
You know, those kind of things. It was always cool, and it's, you know, this was just like me jamming in my bedroom for years and years.
Probably the first song I learned how to play was Iron Man, because it was all could be done all on one string. And I probably didn't use multiple fingers like this. I probably went.
As I got a little bit older, of course, everyone got into Sabbath, so, you know, Iron Man and things like that, things like, you know.
Well, the first song I learned was Electric Funeral by Black Sabbath, and because being a bass player, it was single noted, so I could kind of pick it out with single notes. So Electric Funeral was pretty much the first one that I felt comfortable playing. Listening to Paranoid was the first record I bought with my own money by Black Sabbath, and it was in E standard, so I wasn't obviously much of a lead player coming from bass and playing guitar. So actually, War Pigs, the solo, just the melody, I think was the first one that stuck with me. It was like very triumphant, so I can do a little bit of the beginning of that.
What was the riff that made you want to pick up the guitar?
The riff that made me want to pick up guitar? Electric Funeral, Black Sabbath.
Yeah.
It was that. When I heard that, I think I was like 12 years old, and I was like, man, that sounds evil. Like, what is that?
Yeah.
I was like, how do they make that sound? And I knew like a guitar, but I thought of it like an acoustic guitar, and I was like, this isn't right. And then I found an amp, and I saw a distortion button. I was like, what's that button do? And I heard it, and it made me... I was like, oh, I want to do that. And then I got into Sabbath, Zeppelin, all the really classic stuff I could still kind of hear on like classic rock radio.
Black Sabbath, Paranoid.
And that's when I started expanding from punk rock. He was one of the few bass players that played with did the gallop with 4 fingers.
By the way, I mean, almost every early Sabbath riff, you know. Now, I gotta say, I knew that Tony Iommi had plastic fingers because he cut the tips of his fingers off. Kids, you know this shit? You know how he did it? Cutting a bagel. It's the most common way. Be careful. Get a bagel cutter, kids. You know, you should know better. You know, don't try to cut a bagel with a knife. You'll cut your goddamn fingers right off. You'll end up like Tony Iommi, which is probably a good thing. Very successful career. Remember that video for Paranoid? Huh? I noticed Tony Iommi, he was playing it at the 12th fret. Still sounded great, right? He might have just been with us because he was like, this is a video, I can do whatever the I want. Just playing the tracks and shit.
What was the first riff that I ever played and learned? You know, it was funny because it's the standard ones. It's always the Iron Man or Smoke in the Water. or something like that, really simple. And for me, it was that song. It was actually Iron Man, one of my best friends growing up. He was a bass player, and he went and he learned Iron Man, and he came back, he's like, hey man, check this out. And I was a drummer first, so I didn't play guitar, but I was like, man, I want to learn that. And he showed it to me, and you know, the Iron Man. And this part here, that was always the scary part, you know, that freaked me out. I learned that riff from him, and it was automatic. Like, I'm a guitar player. When you learn a song, that is your entrance into being an actual guitar player. You can noodle around and make noises with it, but when you know a riff, you have arrived. You've made your mark, you know, you're starting that journey. So that was, for me, it was that.
I think the Smoke on the Water and the Iron Man riffs are the two most iconic, most learned riffs of all time. Yeah, but they're simple stuff, power chords, but you never forget them once you hear them.
The Sabbath means what sparked us and why we were where we were, you know. One of my favorite Sabbath lists, definitely. I heard that riff and I was like, oh my God!
The first riff that I learned was, I think it's a Sabbath song in The Warning. It's a part where it's kind of a jammy part. And Tony does a... So I think that was the part that I first was able to connect with, moving some spots around.
Yeah, my big brother, he taught me stuff. And the very first riff that I learned to play was Iron Man from Black Sabbath, the legendary.
So everything changed for me when I went to my stupid friend's house when I was, I don't know, 13 years old, 14 years old, and I learned
So the first two riffs I ever actually learned on guitar, I think it's a toss-up between Black Sabbath Paranoid and Metallica Seek and Destroy.
I was really hooked on rock at that point, and asked my parents for a guitar. And the first riff I got to learn was from my first teacher. I went in the first week, and he taught me how to play the verse riff for Paranoid, Black Sabbath. From there, I'd say after about a year and a half, they hired another teacher named TJ Helmrich, who's an outstanding guitar player, and he taught me theory and soloing, in addition to 8-finger technique, because he was starting out on that. and developing it. And so that's something that came full circle for me, ending up being able to be a Night Ranger and do the Rock in America parts. Once I learned that power chord and learned Paranoid, I started to piece together things just by ear from having a sense of pitch developed from piano and cello, like how to, like Iron Man. Really loved Black Sabbath in the early going, and some of the single note riffs too, like Electric Funeral. So loved Black Sabbath in the early days.
One of the first riffs I learned how to play, I believe it was a Black Sabbath song off Paranoid, and I believe it was Electric Funeral. I learned a bunch of songs off that record: War Pigs, Iron Man, Electric Funeral. I'm sure there was a few other ones that I learned on there.
Strange thing that happened with my introduction to Sabbath was I was listening to the Dio years first. So I loved Dio's voice, and so my dad, when I first got a guitar, was like, okay, let me just show you something, just so you can get the ball rolling and make yourself feel like you're cool. Because my dad was not into like, let's teach you Mary Had a Little Lamb, which I'm very thankful for.
Thank God.
So we started with Heaven and Hell. So yeah.